to another video by Unitator YouTube. Today I will be reviewing the Tier 10 British heavy tank, the FV215b. Now, what exactly is the FV215b? Well, this tank is a heavium. In essence, it combines the properties of a heavy tank with the properties of a medium tank. Now, this tank, the FV215b, is most often compared to the American Tier 10 heavium tank, the T110E5. Now, what makes the FV215b stand out? Well, the FV215b has an amazing gun. Its gun, the 120mm L1A1 gun, has excellent accuracy. It has excellent aim time at 1.7 seconds, excellent dispersion at only 0.33, and the great penetration of 259, rate of fire of 6.9, and an average damage of 400 per armor piercing and APCR shot. Now, the combination of the rate of fire with the average damage makes this tank have a damage per minute of about 2,760, which is amazing for a tank of tier 10, with very few tanks outclassing it. So you can really dish out the damage on the enemies combining this high-performing gun with the mobility that this tank gets. Now, you would not expect great mobility out of a heavy tank. Well, that's why we call it a heavium. This tank has a weight of 70.8 tons with an engine power of it's 950, giving this vehicle a power to weight ratio of about, one sec, doing my calculations, about 13, which is quite good for a heavy tank. Well, now what this means is that this tank can accelerate fast, it can move up slopes fast, and it can maintain that speed pretty well. This tank only has a speed limit of 34, but it is much higher than when you compare to almost any other tier 10 heavy tank. Also, its traverse speeds, both on the hull and on the turret at 25 degrees and 33 degrees respectively, is almost unmatched, which means that no medium tank, except for possibly a Leopard 1 using engine boost, can effectively circle the FV215b, which makes this an excellent flanker as well. As to its armor, you can't really expect much from this tank. At the front of the hull, you only have 152mm, albeit pretty well sloped. At the sides, a paltry 101, and at the rear, even worse, 76. Now, if you want armor, you really have to go to the turret on this tank. The turret at the front is 254mm, sides 152, and the rear 101. Now, the only major weak point on this tank's turret would be the cupola, as you can see on the top here. However, you can only effectively penetrate the cupola more than, say, half the time if you're firing down up onto it, which is a much harder task to do. Now, this is so much better than compared to the giant tumor on the top of the E5. So, why get the FV215b over the E5? Well, the FV215b trades its hull armor, which is much better on the E5, for better mobility and a much better performing gun. This gun can easily wipe out an enemy tank in almost no time. Now, coming to the gun, this is a very nice aspect. You get cheap hesh on this tank, which means you have a penetration value of 90 to 150mm. This can get through the sides and rear of most medium tanks and the rear of most other tanks. Which means if you use hesh, your damage output, or rather your DPM, will be even greater. So, what's not to like about this tank? This tank is great mobility, it has a great gun, it has good turret armor and relatively mediocre hull armor, it has great traverse, it has pretty good view range. So, I think that if you are deciding on a tier 10 heavium tank, I would highly recommend the FV215b. Now, the FV215b, as to mention it, was nerfed by 100 hit points in patch 2.4 from, I believe, 2400 to 2200 to 2100, as you can see here. So, just to quickly summarize the pros and cons of this tank, you have a very accurate gun with a high rate of fire and DPM, especially when using your Hesh rounds. You have a really nice health pool, even though it has been slightly nerfed. You have actually above average gun depression, which you would not have expected on a rear turreted tank such as this. You have 7 degrees of gun depression, which is more than workable on almost any slope. A fair amount of warning though, especially when coming from the tier 9 of this line, the Conquer, as you can see here. It might be a bit of a challenge for some players to adjust from the front turret playstyle to the rear turret playstyle, which of course plays a bit more conservatively, relies more on hull down, side scraping techniques, things to that effect. In addition, you have so because of the rear mounted turret, as I said, you can side scrape. However, be very careful when you are side scraping, as your side armor is quite weak and can be overmatched by guns of extremely high caliber, such as say the 150mm gun on the JPZ E100. Now, to the cons of this tank. It has quite weak all-around hull armor for this tank, it only having a marginally better hull than the tier 9 Conquer and the tier 8 Caernarvon in this line. Its ammo rack and its fuel tanks are in the front, which means they will get damaged and you will get lit on fire quite often, especially with high caliber rounds penetrating the front of your tank. You are you are you don't have a great top speed, especially considering the low armor, but you can maintain a good speed due to the good, rather decent power to weight ratio of 13. Now, let's move into Armor Inspector for a quick look at the values of this armor. Here I am looking at the FV215b tank in the eyes of the 120 L1A1 gun that this tank gets. As you can see here, of course, off the bat, you have very little armor on the front of your hull. You can see here it's only a little more than 200 effective armor, and on the lower plate, it's barely over 100mm of effective armor. So you cannot rely at all about the protection of your frontal hull unless at an extreme angle, or unless going, of course, lower caliber guns. Now, as I said, when trying to penetrate the turret, it is a much more difficult feat because you have to hit the lower bar here for a penetration into the cupola when moving at the flat surface. However, of course, when you get the top part of the turret firing down onto it, it is much easier to penetrate. The turret itself is quite well armored, as you can see there, at having effective values of upwards of a ricochet or a very high 200mm. The sides, of course, are very, very, very awful, as is the rear at a paltry 76mm. So that's a quick armor inspector view of the tank. So, now about the loadouts that you want to practice on this tank. As you can see here, I equipped the consumables of the multi-purpose restoration pack for extinguishing your fires, repairing, healing your crew members all in one. It restores every 60 seconds. I also like to pack adrenaline because it massively improves your gun's DPM, especially when you're having to fight off several enemies at once or pushing through a tough flank. It can really help out your team to punish those enemy tanks. Finally, I run Pudding and Tea, which is of course the crew consumable on this tank. It is quite helpful and I run it on almost every tank I get. My ammunition loadout, this tank gets a slightly lower ammo capacity, especially in your bigger games in which you need to fire all of your ammunition, so I do carry 15 AP, 15 APCR, and 5 Hesh. As to the equipment, I run Vents, Verse Stabs, and Gun Rammer. The Vents improve with the general crew skills, the Verse Stabs really help with snapshots and the movement of your turret, and finally, Gun Rammer, of course, just helps speed up the reload process. Put simply, I just love this tank. It is a great tank. There's nothing not to like. So let's get into some mastery gameplay. Here we can see here that the enemy is composed mostly of heavy tanks, especially like that of the KV4 STI, and we are on a Lost Temple. So I want to get into the town area so I can maximize the turret armor of this tank by using the low-lying cover such as buildings and other obstacles such as the stairs. Of course, the key to winning any Lost Temple game, at least in the city, is to capture the central pagoda, which I will try to attempt. Immediately you can see the very nice workable gun depression of the FV215b at 7 degrees, and the quite nice mobility of this tank, hence the classification of a heavium. So we try and poke out a little bit, try and get a shot into the object, however he backs up and we miss our shot. And here, of course, we see that the weak fuel tank of this tank is present, as it is initially completely damaged by the E5 in one hit. We wait for the E5, and he pops out of cover, and we slam one into his side. Oh, we auto-aim a bit onto him, put one into his side for another 400 damage. And you can see here again the really nice DPM on this tank. 400 alpha damage combined with 6.9 rounds a minute definitely makes for a dangerous and deadly machine. Unfortunately, that one misses a bit of RNG, as I felt that I completely aimed that shot, but what can you do? RNG is troll. We slam one into that T-44, and bit of poor play by me in terms of situational awareness. I did not realize that object 704 was there, and so I got slammed by him. Luckily, we put on a sneaky, cheeky shot into the back of the T-44. As you can see here, the hash is quite useful on lightly armored targets or on the rears of some vehicles, as I took away 500 hit points from that cute little T-44 in one shot. Unfortunately, we missed the, or rather bounced the cupola of the KB4, and just trying to wait for the object to come out again. He doesn't, so I try to make a bold play here. I'm still on APCR, which is another bit of bad play by me. I should have switched back to AP. This APCR is a bit unnecessary, but, you know, in the heat of battle, sometimes I forget to switch ammo. I just want to focus more on the game. The KB4 gets taken out. Unfortunately, a bit of Stalinium trolls us as we bounce the heavily angled frontal armor of the Object 704, the Tier 9 Soviet tank destroyer. However, we do manage to pick him off eventually. Right now, I am worried and helping my IS-8, who unfortunately dies, but I do want to rather avenge him and kill the IS-7. We unfortunately RNG once again trolls us as we leave the IS-7 on a meager 7 hit points. I just load a little bit of HE here simply for that ability to take him out for sure and without the possibility of bouncing. And finally, I continue my little roundabout way. See, RNG has paid us back as we put another cheeky shot right into the back of that Object 704. I do use some APCR here because the game is a very close 2v2, and I do want to use every resource available to win, as we slam that APCR shell right through the cheeks of the Object 140 and shut him down. Here, the game is pretty much guaranteed. We just sneak up behind the STI and finish him off. We get a great 5-kill result, as you can see here in the post-game stats. We get, unsurprisingly, a Top Gun for 4 kills, a Radley Walter for 5 kills, and then our Mastery Badge. We get 6,000 damage, 5 kills, with 1.7k experience, including 931 spotting damage, which is a bit surprising. Anyway, that's all. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like or subscribe down below, and keep on tanking. Mobilize.